Hi, and welcome to A Parent's Guide for Raising Happy, Healthy, and Resilient Children, presented in partnership with Beach Cities Health District and South Bay Mommies and Daddies. I'm Laura Nickerson, and we have the most talked about topic that I could imagine today. We're talking about tips for raising your children in the time of a pandemic and how to manage their screen time. We definitely needed a professional to talk about this. So we're bringing in Dr. Hannah Kim, a pediatrician. Dr. Kim, I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Well, this is simple tips for balancing our screen time. It has been what a year to have kids on screens. They're on screens for school. They're on screens after school. Uh, is that okay? Is it okay that they've been on a little more this year than normal?
It really has been a strange year. And absolutely, it's something we need to expect now. We're in this ever-changing digital world, and this year was a huge introduction to it. And so it should be expected at this point in time that we just have to roll with the punches sometimes. Um, but I do feel like this year has taught us a lot, that there are certain things we do have to be more careful about in terms of screen time. And I'm hoping you and I can talk a lot more about that. And I think the biggest thing really is separating the learning tools of what it can offer versus some of, unfortunately, the detriments it can have to our emotional and physical well-being.
That is such a great point because now we not only have kids on screens more than ever just because of availability, but then all year long, we've had for a lot of us remote learning the entire year. So, how do we balance that? Are they allowed to have a little more? Is that okay that we gave them that extra time for entertainment purposes?
Sure. So when we talk about screen time, we really do mean the things beyond what's expected during your school hours. So we are talking about what you use for personal entertainment. Um, Usually we have different cutoffs. So for example, for our little ones who are 0 to about 18 to 24 months, we really recommend that there is no screen time, except for maybe a little bit of FaceTiming or something that's somewhat face-to-face interaction. And then for our little older groups, about ages 2 to 5, we really hope that they can limit their screen time to about an hour a day of quality TV or screen time, phone, computer, tablet, whatever you may have. And then beyond that, really, if we can limit it to under 2 hours of entertainment, that would be ideal as well.
So that's beyond remote learning. This is TV screens, all of that, they're all the same? Or it would be, for example, if there were a choice between a TV that's a little further away from your eye line versus a tiny little screen where they're staring at this fine
Right.
print, is there a better or a worse there?
That's a fantastic question. So you're right. If we were talking, you and I, like 20 years ago, the only option is our TV. But now we have the introduction of computers, laptops, iPads, all different kinds of tablets. And so you're right, there is a variety. And we're actually approaching more and more studies that actually delineate between these devices. And some studies show that certain types of screen time can actually affect us more than others. And that might be more than anything the TV and social media.
TV and social media are worse than a phone, for
Yeah,
example, or a tablet. That's shocking to me. Tell me more about that.
I would say, sure, in terms of content, is what I would say.
Ah,
If you think about TV, there are certain TV shows um, that can impact the way we feel about ourselves, for example. There's a lot of reality TV shows out there. There's a lot of things out there where certain, for example, teenagers come out with this ideal body type for a lot of our teenage girls who are going through adolescence. That could be a very difficult time. Same with social media. Social media, you can see someone else's life being so idealistic and wonderful that it's not really reality. And when you look at these, it can really cause some teenagers and adolescents to feel that they're comparing themselves to what they see on TV or social media. And that can lead to things like not feeling as good about themselves, and unfortunately can then lead to things like depression. So when I say the content is very important, that's why I use the examples of TV and screen time through social media. Um,
That
Computers are a little bit different and video games are a little bit different, but those are all included in screen time, but are not necessarily associated with depression or
hmm.
or about, feeling a little bit less about yourself, for example.
Which I think applies for adults as well. I think we all have those feelings of feeling that we're comparing ourselves to somebody else or not adding up or not showing off the way that other people are showing off.
Right.
And eventually we'll all figure out that, you know, people don't always show their whole life on social media. We would hope people know that by now. But
Exactly.
teenagers are very impressionable. Young people are very impressionable. In fact, I had heard that Instagram or Facebook is looking at doing a kids version of Instagram, and there was a lot of kickback about that. I'm curious just to know if you had heard of that, and if so, what your thoughts might be.
I have heard of it in the recent news, and this is simply just a personal opinion of mine, but I'm really hoping we can just stay away from it for as long as possible. Um, it really brings into conversation even of like, when is the right time to even introduce something like a phone to some of our kids? When is the right time to expose them to some of these things like social media? The reality is right now, our adolescents, 90% of them have gone to social media site. Three-quarters of them have their own personal profile, and over half of them actually go to a site, a social media site daily. So this is the reality, but if we can push that off for as long as possible or until they're about 12 to 14, um, some experts say that that would be the best. The idea of a new Facebook for younger kids, I'm not the biggest fan.
One more thing we have to monitor, and we do as parents, we have to monitor. We can't dig our heads and,
That's right.
a hole in the sand, put our heads in the sand and say, "Oh, I don't understand it." We don't have that option anymore because our kids are being exposed to that on the daily, whether or not we want them to, or whether or not, we don't know anything about it. So I think that's a really interesting conversation to have. I am interested to know, and I have teenagers, and so I'm curious about this as well for me personally in a pandemic when our kids were really hit by depression, loneliness, just it was such a tough year for them. Was there a benefit there to being able to talk to their friends online, maybe have some kind of community through social media? Did that maybe balance out a little bit of that extra screen time that they had?
You do bring up a very good point. And this doesn't come so much from research that I read about, but more from just my practice and being able to talk to a lot of teenagers in this past year regarding just that. So instead of our questions really revolving around how many hours of screen time are you getting, it really became a matter of what was the quality of your screen time. So I personally was wanting to make sure that some of my adolescents were keeping in touch with their friends, whether it was through FaceTime, video chatting, things like that. And even with things like playing video games in some of our adolescents, it's a reality. And I think the important part is really to make sure that you kind of know who your kids are playing with online. And if you can keep an open dialogue with your kids, I think it's um, safe and okay for them to spend a little bit of time during the week for their entertainment to stay connected with their friends while they play their video games, as long as you as a parent are aware of what's going on.
So beyond the element of the content and the social structure of some of the online things they're watching and seeing, what about the physical elements, the detriments that, for example, the blue light from a screen, the tiny print, all of
Mm,
those things? What should we as parents look for in especially young children, and to say, oh,
mm,
this is a problem, this is actually physically hurting them?
sure. So during elementary school years, so about ages 6 to 11, I would say, we do see that there's a significant increase in the numbers of screen time being had. And with that comes a concomitant decrease in your physical activity and in your sleep. So we know this to be true. And so this is where some of us have been concerned this past year. We're worried about lack of exercise and we're worried about a lack of sleep. Blue light in particular is part of like the short wavelengths that are emitted from the TV screen, from your phone screens. Um, And with that, that can really affect the melatonin levels in your body, as well as just keep you a little more alert and even shift sometimes your circadian rhythms. So with that, we've always tried to encourage our parents to see if they can at least have their teenagers put their phones away for at least 30 to 60 minutes before they go to bed. And if they're willing, even better is to charge your phones outside of your bedroom, get an old school alarm clock to wake you up in the morning instead, so that you don't get any chimes or bells that are waking you up in the middle of the night. In terms of the blue light and other things, I've gotten a lot of questions this year about should we buy some of the blue light blocking lenses. And so far, the American Academy of Ophthalmology does not recommend getting extra glasses for that. In terms of the strain that comes from your eye, it really is from the contrast or having something so close up to your face, and the glare. And so for that, I would actually recommend um, what they call the 20-20-20 rule. So every 20 minutes, take a break for about 20 seconds and look at something that's 20 feet away. When you keep looking at something super close, your eyes strain and then they relax when you kind of let them go look into the distance. So that's something I would recommend for kids who are on screens for a long time.
Which is, it's hard to enforce all of these things, the limits, the 20
Yeah.
20 20 maybe, or the way or the kind of content that they're watching, especially when, a lot of us have been working full time with our kids on screens all day. So tell me some of your best advice for managing the screen time as far as the discipline of it in the different age
Mm,
groups that we are all dealing with. It can be really, really hard to enforce that. So what's your best advice for that?
sure. So I think generally speaking, everyone should check out the American Academy of Pediatrics website and search for the Family Media Plan. I like this because it's free and it really targets all age groups, just like you're mentioning, Laura. And it allows for the family to sit down together and make some rules and boundaries for where and when you're going to use your screens. For example, um, you can decide as a family you're not allowed to have the phone in the kitchen or in your bedroom. Or you can even make rules such as our screen times will happen between school and dinner time, but no screens after dinner time. Um, or as a family, you can also decide just things like what are some of the things that we think are appropriate to watch together or do together. And in terms of different age groups, Laura, so like I mentioned just previous questions ago, um, the number of hours recommended for each age group, how do we actually reinforce that? And it's hard to do it. Um,
Yeah.
Reality is we're all kind of going beyond what's recommended. And I think there's a lot more studies to be done in terms of is what we're doing okay? Because I think the content out there, there's such a variety that we don't really know yet, like what's really helpful for development and what's not. So, for example, for ages 0 to 2, like I said, go ahead and FaceTime, see your relatives and friends through the phone. But what we do know is that these kids, through an experiment that was done about learning new words, they will be more engaged if it is a live person on the other side as opposed to someone who's been pre-recorded. And then you actually only ended up learning those new words if there was a parent next to you guiding you and helping you out. So the lesson
Hmm.
behind that really is even if you're going to FaceTime with someone as a relative and you're under the age of 2, you still need an adult next to you kind of guiding you through what's going on. And that will be the most helpful. There's no doubt, hands down, for younger kids and infants, the best way to learn is face-to-face interaction. So if at all you can really just use the phone or your laptop for those family and friend calls, that would be ideal. And then into our next group of like that young toddler, like preschool, early elementary school age, I had mentioned 1 hour a day of quote unquote quality screen time. And that's where it's like, oh, Laura, what is quality screen time? So, what I can tell you for now is that there are educational tools out there that we feel can help with some language development. Um, and I would actually recommend that maybe some parents check out commonsensemedia.org. It's a nonprofit organization, and they actually they'll rate anything from TVs, movies, learning tools, and video games. You do need to subscribe, but I think for a family with especially multiple kids in the house, I think it could be a great resource. What we do know to be quality for now is something that is slow paced and intentional. And what do I mean by that? I mean something that's realistic. If you notice a lot of kids stuff recently, like on YouTube and whatever, the pace is so quick and they change scenes every 5 seconds. And we're seeing that that can lead to some inattention down the road. And when I talk about intentional shows, I mean things that can teach empathy, or life lessons, or things you want your kid to kind of like see and observe if they're going to be watching something. So something that's PBS related, or something like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, or Daniel Tiger, where you learn to take care of your friends and share and things like that. That's what I mean by intentional. And that's where, again, Common Sense Media comes in, because they'll kind of give you synopses of certain shows and tell you why they recommend them. And then for the
It
older
is
kids,
so,
really,
sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, I
Oh,
was
I was
just
just
going to
going to
say,
round it out by saying with the older kids. Sorry, Laura, go.
no, I want you to go because I do want to hear about older kids. So please continue.
Oh, okay. So for the older kids, I think we kind of brushed on this as well, but it really is a matter of content, in my opinion, because we still want our kids to learn how to self-regulate. We want our teenagers to know that, this is what I, as your mom, recommend. And we can create some boundaries for their safety. But I also think like doing a complete, you can't do this at all, you can only watch this or only do this, doesn't allow them to grow per se as an adolescent. And so I really think open communication is key. Um, and being aware of who their contacts are is very important, because let's not forget there's cyberbullying, there's, like I said, playing video games, but oftentimes it can happen with strangers too. And so I think we need to be very vigilant in terms of that. But I do think keeping an open conversation, sometimes playing a video game or two with your adolescent, watching a show or a movie together, I think that goes a very long way.
That's a great point, and I love the idea of parents being involved. I know it's hard to be a parent in this digital age. I know. And the easiest thing to do is hand them a device and go take a shower or do the things that you need to do. It is really hard to sit there and watch Sophia the First there with them, as great as the show was the first 50 times you saw it. But that being said, we kind of, in my opinion anyway, and from what I'm hearing from you, as parents, we kind of need to like step up and understand that this is not a babysitter. This is not an easy way out. It is
Mhm.
actually more work, in my opinion, to have kids in a digital age when we have to filter that information for them, explain how that information is relevant to the world that we live in, and help them navigate learning and seeing almost anything they want, really. Between their
Mhm.
phone or their device or their friend's device, they can look up whatever they want to look up, younger than you would ever imagine. So we really have to be very present in their digital life, which is a challenge, I think, for everybody. One of the things that I've
Absolutely.
noticed, and I've heard of other parents struggling with as well, is what I call the dismount. So whatever the timing may be, maybe they get half
Mm.
an hour a day or an hour, whatever. It's There's something about that transition from being online or being in that zone and then having to get off of the device or leave the device. Really challenging sometimes. Do you have any advice for that?
That's really tough. And I think the one piece of advice I could possibly give is consistency. I think when our kids are on some type of schedule and there's some type of expectation, I believe we can see some progress and not see so much difficulty in that dismount you're talking about. Because if you know that Monday through Friday, from this time to this is the time my parents give me to choose what I want to watch, and it's my time, then I think, you're not going to have the ups and downs, and you just know what to expect. And in general, we know kids do pretty well with schedules, and they do really well with knowing what to expect and what's up next. We've seen a lot of anxiety, Laura, this year. And it's kind
Mhm.
of the same thing I kind of tell my kids who are going through an anxious period of time. There's only so much you can control, and that some of things are out of your control. So, with a lot of anxiety, you're anxious about the things you feel like you can't control. So, let's try to control the things we can. And I think that kind of relates to what you're talking about with the screen time is if we know that this is what I expect on Monday through Friday, then I'll get used to it. So I'm hoping that'll be helpful. I don't think it's the best answer, but hopefully a helpful one.
Any help is great, I think for all of us. How do you manage in a, let's say, a smaller home or an apartment? How do you manage if you have kids of multiple age groups, um, and managing different amounts of screen time for each of them? So, say for example, you've got a toddler that you're trying to keep, very limited, but then I don't know, a middle schooler who's getting TV time at night or whatever that may be. How on earth do we
Mhm.
navigate that?
That's a really tough question. I think at least if we have some age groups that are a little closer together where one still is able to read or in that age where they love to please and want to take care of a younger sibling, so like maybe like an early elementary school with some toddler age sibling, I think there's ways to combine screen time in that sense where you can have an older sibling, read something even if it's on a tablet, to the younger sibling, something like that, or
Mhm.
even do things like interactive, like video chatting, that kind of thing too. Or even some educational tool type of stuff where they're doing things and they can use their hands and stuff like that, that where you would still be okay, for example, for your younger children seeing that because the content at least is okay. But you are completely right. It's going to be hard. And I think the family plan really should include things like this room could be your private room for doing XYZ on the tablet. And then at this certain time, you know that it's your sister or brother's turn to use the tablet. That kind of brings up something separate too, but um, there's been discussions of having basically a family tablet. It'll make it even harder because now siblings are sharing like one device, but the thought is like it's a shared device for the family and not particularly your own device. Um, it might be really hard it might be a difficult thing and it might be a struggle to do that because right now everyone wants their own device. And in fact, a lot of kids are getting their own devices at an earlier and earlier age, like you mentioned. But if
Right.
you can sit down as a family, at least, and if you have some older kids and just make the rules together, I think that's going to be helpful because at least your kids have ownership.
That's a great point. Ownership. There are some beyond common sense media, which by the way, I adore and love. There are third-party apps out there that can do some of that work for you. But I wonder how effective they really are. Have you had any experience with those? Do you think those are effective? And in
I'll
that, I
tell you
mean
what,
ones
I
that maybe
personally have
control the
not used.
time. Mhm,
Right, right. So I was just going to say that aspect alone might be helpful. Um,
mhm.
the time control thing, sometimes, Laura, kids do better when it's a timer that goes off that tells them they can't watch something anymore, as opposed to a parent that tells them they can't watch something anymore. So I would see if that can be helpful. And I personally would be curious if these third party groups, um, with the data that they end up getting, I'm curious to see if they start using that for more research, just to know, exactly how much time are kids on their phones or on their tablets in 2021 compared to just 3 years ago. Because even then, the numbers were pretty high. And now we can kind of collect more data in terms of what was the content and how much time were you on that particular content. So I'd be curious. I'd be curious, but I do have to say, we're always worried about privacy issues and things like that too. So I personally don't know enough about these third-party programs, but I do think that potentially they could give us good information.
Speaking of privacy, as our kids are, when they're young, when they're 2, when they're 4, when they're 6, in I'm assuming that most parents feel the way that I do, that you have the right to look through their search history or control what they do or don't get to see when they're online and have some of that oversight. But as kids start to get into school age and maybe their friend has a phone that doesn't have filters and, or whatever, you don't get to control that quite as much. And I'm
Mm,
curious about the right to privacy that kids
mm.
have as they grow into adults. And at what point, as a parent, digging through their personal information and conversations with text or whatever, is that crossing a line? And when is that?
Um, that's a tough question and a good one. I would have to say, at least from a pediatrician standpoint, we actually give, you know, starting from our 12 and 13-year-olds, a lot of privacy. I don't know if you remember with your kids and if when they go to the pediatrician's office, but there should be a point in time where we ask you to leave the room so that we can ask personal questions to the kids. And that starts, as you can see, pretty early, 12, 13 years old. And so I think it's very important. Number one, you are still the parent. I still believe you are still the parent. And so you can put on the controls that you need on your settings so that, your children can go to certain sites that are safe. That I think is fine. And I also think it's fine to discipline in the sense that if they are going to the wrong sites or you find out in some way that they're doing something inappropriate on social media or whatever, you have the right to take those things away, you know? But in terms of digging through and all of that, it's a very fine line that I would say that the safer thing to do is make sure you have that open line of communication earlier on so that you build a trust early and so that it's not a strange thing for you to know who their friends are. It's not a strange thing for you to know that Zach and Evan are going to be joining your son when they play this game tonight. Those are the buddies he's going to be talking to. So I would say try to have these conversations early and make it a part of their normal life so that you don't even have to contemplate things like digging into search histories, but in the end, when it comes to your devices and what you're looking at and phones, I would say, hey, I'm paying the bill. And if you don't follow my rules, no phone for you.
Yeah.
But
Well, and
you're
it's
right.
it's
You're right, Laura. Like
parenting,
it's tough in
you know.
terms of, yeah, your job, you're under my roof. My job is to keep you safe until you're 18 years old and you leave my house. And so I'm going to try
Mhm.
to keep you as safe as possible.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's been
And
very, very challenging.
it's a whole new planet. I will give a little piece of advice though that I've learned is as a parent, you can change the Wi-Fi password whenever you want.
That's great. You absolutely
Mhm.
can. That's right.
So, as parents, though, we don't always follow these guidelines very closely,
hmm
do we? So, how much responsibility do we have to model good online habits?
I think we can do a lot starting early on. If we don't want our kids to be on the screen all the time, then we should probably put our phones down every now and then because I catch myself on my phone a lot. So we should put our phones down, have breaks. We should go outside as a family. And the good thing now is hopefully we're on the other side of this pandemic where now things are opening up. You have hopefully more safe spots outside to be at. And so you can do physical activities together as a family. And little kids should be watching you read. They should be watching you read a book. And hopefully they will, want to be just like mom and dad or whatever parent guardian they may have and kind of just follow after you and read more books or follow after you and go outside and play some more as opposed to picking up the phone and just, you know, being immersed in it. I know.
Yeah,
And the scary
it's a hard
thing, Laura,
habit to
is
break.
it's really it is, and they're smart about it. There's algorithms, there's algorithms. They know what you're watching, they know what you're searching, and they know what to pop up next for you. And for our adolescents, we need to teach them that this is the way it works. They know what you're searching for. And unfortunately, Laura, even for a lot of our kids this year who have shown like depressive symptoms, they can go into this spiral just because the algorithms already know what they're looking at. And if they're looking at some things that are bringing themselves down more and more, can you imagine the things that start popping up? Like it's just a streamline of things that are consistently putting them in a place that's not very healthy. And
Yeah.
they know how to do that, you know?
Yep.
So
It, so hard to
technology has
navigate.
wonderful, wonderful things to it. But you're right. We just really need to be vigilant with our children.
Yeah, it's an added responsibility. As we start
Mm.
to end this pandemic, I can't say that there's a single parent out there who hasn't broken those guidelines by a long shot over the course of that
Oh,
last
yeah.
year. And we're all just trying to get through it. And for the most part, hopefully a lot of us have. And so now, how do we start to wean them slowly off of this digital social life, this digital world into the real world again?
Laura, I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't know if digital life is ever going away. And I think we're going to have to adapt to it. But I totally understand what you mean because as a pediatrician, I'm hoping all my kids go outside and play again because a lot of them haven't been able to. So I'm really hoping that as summer rolls around and now, many of our kids are either in part-time or full-time school again, that they really end up really enjoying recess and gym and going back to their sports games and going to camp this summer. We're getting a lot of, like physical exam forms for camp. So I'm really
Yay.
hoping we just get a taste of that sun again and we remember how good it felt and how nice it was to hang out with our friends in person, and just go out and be interactive again. I'm really hoping that just the change of landscape of our everyday lives now will just hopefully gradually push our kids out to have more fun, see their friends, and exercise again.
Wouldn't it be amazing if everyone got sick of it and actually just went
Oh,
back
I
to playing and doing the outdoor
know.
stuff? I mean, wouldn't that be great? I don't know if it'll happen,
It would
but
be
it
so
it
good.
is great.
I know
Now,
it
I did
is.
get one question that I really am curious about your answer for. Some
Okay.
kids and younger kids especially, but all kids have their own different processes of how they get upset or angry, and some kids have, more challenges in that area. So if your child, for example, has an issue with emotional outbursts or things like that, and the only way they calm
Mm.
down is by giving them a tablet or a phone, is that bad? Is that a habit we should be fighting against, or is it okay in small doses?
Um, that's a really good question. There's some research that shows that there are some certain behaviors already that kids may have um, already, right? And so sometimes there are certain things that we can use our phones for that is very helpful, actually. So if I were to have, a child who has autism spectrum, for example, and they are calmed down by a certain type of music or something specific that they see, I would use my phone as a great tool. And for that, I think I would be quite thankful that we have some of the resources we do now digitally. I do feel, though, however, that the opposite also exists, where now we're creating this habitual behavior of, here, just look at the phone and shh, quiet down, please. And I
Yeah.
think that's a slippery slope, and so I really do think that we can work on distractions, hopefully, that aren't always based using a screen. But let's be honest, Laura, I get it. You're out at a restaurant sometimes and your kid's going berserk, and sometimes you just show them a quick little rhyme on the phone and they quiet down, and then you're like, phew, everyone stop staring at us. So
I've got 5 more minutes.
I'm here just to share with, I know, oh, you know, I'm just here to share with you just some of the research we know already, or some of the things that we know and that we see. But I think, the reality is we're all moms and dads, and I think we should all have grace with each other. And I think we should all understand that sometimes we just need a little break, and sometimes the phone gives us that. Um, but just answering your questions, little doses I think here and there are fine. If I think in the larger picture, you're hopefully not just depending on it for everything. There's just so much more to life, that these kids are missing out. There's so many things that have been displaced by the phone and the tablet. And we really, I think, need to get back to all this like face-to-face interaction and those just quality and good time with other people.
I worry a lot about the ability to problem solve and come up with their own
Mm.
entertainment, creative thinking, because I feel like so much with these devices and online entertainment, whatever, that they don't have to overcome boredom. They don't have to overcome a problem. So and so doesn't want to play with me. It's just right here. It's all given to them. And I worry sometimes that they won't grow up to have creative solutions to problems because they haven't learned how.
Mm. And I think with that, you really start early. We always
Right.
know that even when it comes to toys, the best toys are the ones that you can be creative with. So old school blocks, you know, learning how to stack them, make bridges, and make homes, that will build curiosity, that will build creativity. Um, so I think even though we advance into this digital world, some things are worth keeping from the old world. Sounds strange to say that, but if you can, to get open-ended toys, things that, your kids can really learn to just use their imagination for, that's really great. And let's not, I mean, I just want to make sure we're, nothing is black and white and that nothing is easy. And so even with like this whole digital world, I'm pretty sure, Laura, if you and I were to talk in another like 5 years, the digital world's gonna be different again. There's probably some crazy educational tools that, really do like make kids super creative.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
can't,
We'll
like
it'll
who
be
knows what's
totally
gonna be
moot, the
out
whole
there?
conversation.
It
Who
really
knows?
will
And
be. And
we'll
there's
just
gonna be some hologram stuff that pops out and you can like build your own little Legos.
it'll be Mr. Rogers. He'll come in a hologram and we'll be like, oh, now what do we do?
I know.
Um, it's so great talking to you. And as we wrap up this conversation, I just wanted to ask you, as parents, are there any physical changes or markers that we should be looking for, especially with young children, that might bring it to our attention that they're having too much screen time? Is there specific physical things we should be looking for?
Hmm. Um, I would say a few things. So just over time, if you feel like your kids are just being sedentary, you feel like your kid used to be out and about having a great time, but now you feel like they're just sitting there, they're not doing anything, they're not being active. I think those are reasons to definitely go see your pediatrician because it's multifactorial, Are they being influenced by something that's making them sad or upset? Is it literally just too much screen time that they're not getting up, exercising, moving around? Um, are they so into watching TV that they're not getting their vitamin D and they are feeling a little down? And your pediatrician really can help in that sense because we ask a whole bunch of questions. We make sure that there's nothing medically going on, emotionally going on. I mean, the whole body, it's going through a lot of stuff as you develop. And there can be some things such as a sedentary lifestyle that just has a lot of bad outcomes. And that's something we've really been looking out for in this past year.
Yeah, I bet. Well, it has been such an eye-opening conversation with you. So many great pieces of advice that I know as a parent I'm going to take with me. Thank you, Dr. Hannah Kim, for taking the time to chat with me about this. It's really been lovely having you here.
Thank you, Laura. I enjoyed our time together. Thanks for having me.
To all of you out there, I just want to say thank you for joining for this very important conversation. If you are in the South Bay area and you haven't joined the South Bay Mommies and Daddies Facebook group, you should do it right now. There's so many great resources for local parents out there. And again, if you want to learn more about the Beach Cities Health District, bchd.org is their website. Make sure you check it out. Thank you for joining me. I'm Laura Nickerson, and I'll see you soon.